Today we're going to talk about how the Democratic Party and the media wants to destroy Tulsi Gabbard. As we know, Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat that is a U.S. representative for Hawaii's 2nd District since 2013, has announced that she is running for U.S. President in the 2020 election cycle. The Democratic field of candidates is one of the most interesting selection of politicians we've seen in a long time, and I feel that out of all of them, Gabbard probably has the best chance of beating Trump. The reason being is that it all comes down to the disconnect between the DNC and the media to the average voter, especially the average Democrat voter. Why does Gabbard have the best chance of beating Trump? The answer is within the results of the 2016 election and Gabbard's history. Now, one thing I want to make clear, I'm not shilling for Gabbard. Her politics are not my own, but it would be refreshing to see a Democratic candidate that appears to be honest to be running for U.S. president. I think it will lead to actual real debates and discussions that need to happen within this country. So, 2016. Despite Trump losing the popular vote, he did win via the Electoral College. His win is a perfect example why the Electoral College exists. Hillary won California by almost the exact number of votes she won the national popular vote with. That would have created an instance where California decided the entire election. We all know California has a culture that isn't popular in places like the Rust Belt, which went to Trump. The Electoral College exists to give those states more weight against a national vote. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania helped carry Trump to a win in 2016. And historically, these states are very blue. The Hidden Tribes study, which I've mentioned before in my previous videos, shows that only 8% of Democrats are the ultra-progressive types, while the rest are either centrist or just disengaged politically. The centrists, while usually voting Democrat, they can and will vote Republican as well, which we saw with Trump, and we've seen previously with Reagan. Ultimately, these centrists, on both sides, is what a candidate typically campaigns for, while trying to maintain the energy of their base. Why did these Rust Belt states vote for Trump? There's many reasons. Hillary was too corporate and viewed as a dishonest person, and the distrust in the media that was shilling very hard for Hillary, and Clinton's campaign focused on issues that just didn't matter to these Rust Belt voters. Trump capitalized on these issues, important to these people. While Hillary was concerned about identity politics, Trump swooped in and filled a void left by Hillary's campaign. What's interesting, though, Bernie Sanders and Trump were not very far off from each other on certain topics. While, of course, they were wildly far from each other on other issues. Bernie was a champion for the working class as much as Trump was, but since the DNC decided that Bernie wasn't their preferred candidate, they decided to kill off his chances of winning, which further disenfranchised the disengaged and centrist Democrats. If Bernie had run against Trump, these Rust Belt voters would have been much more challenging for Trump to win over. It's not hard to imagine that Michigan and Pennsylvania would have gone blue if Bernie was running against Trump, and that would have given Bernie the win. So what does this have to do with Gabbard? Well, Gabbard's positions are very similar to Bernie. She doesn't have a history of playing identity politics. She isn't a corporate or an establishment Democrat. All of these things Hillary was accused of, as well as much of the current Democratic candidates that have been announced for 2020. She supports federal legalization of marijuana. She was against the TPP. She's pro-choice. She stands for very strict gun control. And despite having a distinguished military career, she's very anti-war, which generally has been a liberal position until recently, it seems. She supports increased minimum wage to $15 an hour, supports universal health care. She supports tuition-free college and wants to end Citizens United. She's very similar to Bernie. She is a minority, she's female, young, and not an establishment Democrat. Almost the perfect candidate to beat Trump, but yet the left is looking to destroy her. Keeping a finger on the media pulse, it's apparent that Kamala Harris has been anointed the candidate of choice by at least the media, and I'm sure we will see the DNC. While they push for Kamala Harris incredibly hard, in grooming Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for the future, the media, and again the DNC, will see Warren, Gillibrand, Castro, and Brooker as not strong candidates and help minimize their presence. They'll treat Bernie as a last election news and write him off. Tulsi, on the other hand, there has been a concentrated attack. It all started with an attack on Gabbard's previous stance on LGBTQ issues. From Rolling Stone, though Gabbard has fashioned herself as an anti-Trump progressive, This past weekend was filled with revelations that could set her back in a crowded 2020 race that won't afford candidates much margin for error. The latest came Sunday night when CNN reported that in the early 2000s, Gabbard touted working for her father's anti-gay organization, the Alliance for Traditional Marriage. The group supported legislation against same-sex marriage and promoted conversion therapy. Gabbard cited how she worked for the ATM, which described homosexuality as, quote, unhealthy, abnormal behavior that should not be promoted or accepted in society, unquote, as she was running for her seat in the Hawaii state legislature. She was 21 at the time. She would later apologize for her previous position and currently supports a very pro-LGBTQ agenda and has since 2012. The media immediately jumped on this with virtue signaling anger. How dare she? But hold up. Time magazine in 2015, 2004, Obama opposes the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, which is also known as DOMA, while running for a U.S. Senate seat in Illinois. He also opposes same-sex marriage. October 2010, Obama starts evolving on gay marriage. May 2012, Obama becomes the first president to support same-sex marriage. Very interesting. I don't seem to recall this same outrage for Obama, but wait, DOMA was also a Clinton-signed bill. From PolitiFact in 2015, Clinton came out in support of same-sex marriage in 2013 after more than a decade of opposing it, but her views are particularly in the spotlight now that she's a presidential candidate. So where was the outrage during the 2016 election? Hillary supported gay marriage a year after Gabbard did. When looking at the accusations thrown at Gabbard within this context, the attack pieces on Gabbard seem to be a non-story. Apparently, only anointed Democrats are allowed to evolve on their positions, but Gabbard is not given that same grace. In the real world, people evolve on their opinions all the time, but in this case, Gabbard isn't allowed that privilege. At one point, conversion therapy was something Gabbard had supported. Again, she isn't allowed to evolve on this issue. And I can only see Obama clarifying his stance in 2015 and Clinton in 2016 that they were against it, but I can't find any reference of support prior to those dates. Gabbard has also been accused of being an Assad apologist, as she even met with him in 2017. The reason for this label is that she is against U.S. involvement in any fashion in the Syrian civil war, and she's had that position from the very beginning. Bernie, during the 2016 election cycle, he had to say the following: I am not a pacifist. I supported the war in Afghanistan. I supported President Clinton's effort to deal with ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. I support airstrikes in Syria, Sanders said at a Democratic presidential debate on CNN in October. As early as April of 2017, he's now against the U.S. involvement in the Syrian civil war. Again, from CNN, the U.S. must not get involved in perpetual warfare in the Middle East, Senator Bernie Sanders said Sunday, in explaining why he was one of the few senators to oppose the recent U.S. missile strikes on Syria. While Gabbard has consistently called Assad a terrible human being, and Syria would be better off without him, she has been consistent with her stance against U.S. involvement in the war. She has said the alternative to removing Assad has considerable danger, the same danger that Bernie mentioned in the Democratic primary debate in Milwaukee in the 2016 election cycle. And God only knows Saddam Hussein was a brutal dictator. We could overthrow Assad tomorrow if we wanted to. We got rid of Gaddafi. But the point about foreign policy is not just to know that you can overthrow a terrible dictator, it's to understand what happens the day after. And in Libya, for example, the United States, Secretary Clinton, as Secretary of the State, working with some other countries, did get rid of a terrible dictator named Gaddafi. But what happened is a political vacuum developed. ISIS came in and now occupies significant territory in Libya and is now prepared, unless we stop them, to have a terrorist foothold. Yet Gabbard is the one getting the heat, despite having the same concerns and having been consistent in her position since the beginning. This goes to show how close Gabbard is to Bernie's positions in 2016. The media is essentially attacking Gabbard for the same stances Bernie had. The media and the DNC colluded against Bernie, and we see that collusion against Gabbard now. As I mentioned before, it's obvious that Kamala Harris is the anointed candidate of choice for the media, and they will be pushing for her very hard, ignoring her shady past. It's like Hillary all over again. But there has been so much in the news recently, it would have to be its own video to cover the past shadiness of Kamala Harris. Let's just say that she hasn't been a very honest politician. The media fears Gabbard. The establishment fears Gabbard. But why? She is a younger, minority female version of Bernie, which to the players of identity politics makes her dangerous to keeping establishment power. She doesn't play identity politics, so they know she isn't on their side. They know that she will win over the Democrats that are not the ultra-progressives. She has to be taken down, and thus the media has used their nuclear option, Russia. The Russian propaganda machine that tried to influence the 2016 U.S. election is now promoting the presidential aspirations of a controversial Hawaii Democrat who earlier this month declared her intention to run for president in 2020. An NBC News analysis of the main English-language news sites employed by Russia in its 2016 election meddling shows Representative Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, who is set to make her formal announcement Saturday, has become a favorite of the sites Moscow used when it interfered in 2016. Several experts who track websites and social media accounts linked to the Kremlin have also seen that they believe may be the first stirrings of an upcoming Russian campaign of support for Gabbard. Oh boy, things are getting spicy. The ultimate trap card, the Russian collusion. Now, there's a ton of threads here, and this is a very fresh story, but one thing to take away is, how do we know the social media accounts they refer to are quote-unquote Kremlin linked? When people read that, they do take that at face value, which is very dangerous. I had previously covered this in another video, but essentially they don't know for sure that they are linked to Russian operatives. They just assume the social media accounts are, simply by how old the accounts are, what they tweet and post about, and the time frame that they post and tweet. It's purely an assumption, but no physical evidence that they are actually tied to Russia. Are they troll accounts? Probably. Are they Russian? Not so sure. Glenn Greenwald with The Intercept has called out the NBC article as fake news. What NBC amazingly concealed is a fact that reveals its article to be journalistic fraud. The same firm, New Knowledge, was caught just 6 weeks ago engaging in a massive scam to create fictitious Russian troll accounts on Facebook and Twitter in order to claim that the Kremlin was working to defeat Democratic Senate nominee Doug Jones in Alabama. The New York Times, when exposing the scam, quoted a New Knowledge report that boasted of its fabrications. We orchestrated an elaborate false flag operation that planted the idea that Roy Moore campaign was amplified on social media by a Russian botnet. This is pretty hard evidence that we have non-Russian actors pretending to be Russian simply to smear Gabbard. Glenn Greenwald's article is shocking and definitely worth a read, and I have included the link to the article in the description below. I would suggest anyone that reads this will question the validity of the Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. If they're willing to do this against a fellow Democrat, naturally they would do it to their most hated opponent, right? To summarize, Gabbard is a threat to the establishment and to the media, so she must be destroyed. It's obvious the media and the DNC do not have the interest of the common people, but interest in keeping their own power. A power that is gained by identity politics and corruption. In the 2020 election cycle, they fear a loss of that power so much they're willing to risk 4 more years of Trump. Anyone that isn't on their side is a threat and is to be destroyed. If Trump wins another 4 years, the media and the ultra-progressives that are pushing the DNC will only have themselves to blame. Thank you for watching. I appreciate any feedback, be it negative or positive. I'd love to keep the conversation going, so please comment below. If you enjoyed this content, please like this video and subscribe. Thank you.